Berlin, December 31, 1938. Spartacus. Olsen reporting from the German capital. The ink on the Munich Agreement was barely dry when the Nazi regime crossed a terrifying new threshold, unleashing an explosion of state-sponsored violence and systematic plunder against minorities of its own population and its annexed territories. Meanwhile, Hitler continues to secretly prepare for the war that the leaders of Western Europe fantasize they have averted. Tonight, as 1938 passes into 1939, we look back at a quarter when the world witnessed a glimpse of the true face of Nazi antisemitic terror. And to this reporter, we seem to be sleepwalking into a new European apocalypse. In the final quarter of 1938, the initial overwhelming relief that followed the Munich Agreement in Britain and France, relief at avoiding war mixed uneasily with shame over Czechoslovakia, and the fear that Munich had not created peace, but only postponed war. While the Spanish Civil War ground towards a nationalist victory and Japanese forces continue their brutal advance in China, the Western democracies found themselves shocked by the effects of their own diplomatic capitulation. Across the continent, rearmament programs were accelerated as it became ever clearer that the crisis had not ended, but had merely changed form. As the true nature of Nazi racial hatred was laid bare, the free world reacted with widespread condemnation, but looked on in helpless revulsion. Already in the first days of the quarter, the terror was clearly exposed. After German troops occupied the Sudetenland on October 1. Only 4 days later, the regime tightened its bureaucratic grip on the Jewish population. A degree invalidated Jewish passports unless stamped with a red J, further restricting the possibility of escape. But it was not only internal terror that was discreetly escalating. Behind closed doors on October 21, Hitler issued a secret directive to the military to prepare for the liquidation of the remainder of Czechoslovakia and the occupation of Memel on the border between Lithuania and the German East Prussian enclave. Simultaneously, racial persecution escalated into mass expulsion. Between October 27 and 29 during the Polenaktion, the Gestapo rounded up some 17,000 Polish Jews living in the Reich, deporting them in brutal conditions to the Polish border. Desperate for revenge, after his parents were among those expelled, a 17-year-old Jewish youth named Herschel Grinban shot German diplomat Anna Matt in Paris on November 7. When Rath died on November 9, Isef Gubba seized the opportunity during the annual Nazi commemoration of the failed 1923 push in Munich. In a fiery antisemitic speech, he used the assassination as a starter gun for a nationwide pog. Then throughout the night of November 9 to 10, during what the Nazis are euphemistically calling Kristallnacht, literally crystal nights, alluding to the massive amount of broken glass, SA men, SMEN, Hitler youth members, local Nazi activists, and participating civilians attacked synagogues, homes, and businesses, while police and fire brigades were ordered not to intervene except to protect neighboring Aryan property. At least 91 Jews were killed during the violence itself, while hundreds more died during and after the pug, including from Beatings, camp abuse, medical collapse, and suicide. The state unleashed a wave of propaganda, falsely claiming that the Jews were the instigator of violence and posed an imminent threat to the security of non-Jewish Germans. To underline the propaganda, on November 11, Jews were banned from owning weapons. The measure was less about any real Jewish armed threat than about intimidation, humiliation, and the hateful fiction that Jews posed a danger to the R. The next day, Hungary imposed a punitive 1 billion Reichsmark fine on the Jewish community and issued decrees officially excluding Jews from retail and skilled trades. On November 15, Jewish children were banned from attending German public schools. And on November 28, a police decree authorized severe restrictions on Jews in public spaces. Foreign condemnation poured in, but did little to push the dial on increasing quotas for receiving Jewish refugees. In London, the government gave in to pressure from voluntary agencies gathered under the umbrella movement for the care of children from Germany and agreed to allow unaccompanied Jewish children under the age of 17 to enter the country as long as they did not burden the British people with any costs, with parents desperate to send away their children to safety in Britain. The first children left the Reich on December 1 in what is now known as the Kindertransport. On December 3, the plunder of those parents was formalized through a decree on the utilization of Jewish property, which accelerated forced Aryanization. The racial drag expanded further on December 8 when Heinrich Himmler issued a decree targeting Sinti. Finally, as the year closed on December 27, the regime's racial policies followed its expanding borders with the Nuremberg race laws fully extended to the annex Sudetenland. The pilgrim has kicked off an unrelenting campaign of expropriation and social death. The regime arrested 30,000 Jewish men during Kristallnacht, sent them to concentration camps like Dau-Bald and Sachsenhausen. Many, at least 26,000, are still held there and subjected to horrific physical abuse and will only be released if they agree to immediately immigrate and forfeit their property to the state. An impossible choice for most of them, as immigration is only possible with financial means, while the Aryanization of the economy is excluding Jews from the workplace and robbing entrepreneurs of their life work. For all those unable to flee, daily life has become a suffocating prison. Jewish citizens face localized curfews, driving bans, pressure to leave homes and apartments, and the beginnings of forced spatial segregation. In the Sudetenland, the arrival of German troops unleashed an immediate wave of terror. The Gestapo and SS arrested thousands of Czech and German anti-Nazis, while the Sudan German Nazi leader Konrad Henlein's stormtroopers attacked both Jewish citizens and Czech citizens under the battle cry, first the Jews and then the Czechs. Meanwhile, the Roma and Sinti, increasingly categorized as a racial problem rather than a social issue, face systematic registration and police harassment following Himmler's December directive. It was again the Nazi complete control of the German press that not only supported but also helped justify this escalation of violence, deliberately inciting the public to become part of These radical actions. Following the shooting of Fromat, Gerbas instructed newspapers to report the incidents in the biggest way possible, explicitly framing it as a Jewish conspiracy against the international criticism of the events on November 9th and 10th was framed as anti-German propaganda and described as a failure abroad to understand the perceived threat of Jewry to cement public support. Music, or complacency, the press cynically described the orchestrated destruction of synagogues and businesses as spontaneous and righteous anger of the German people. But as we shall see, the launch of the pogrom was anything but spontaneous. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Hitler used the media apparatus to mentally prepare the nation for the coming conflict. In a secret speech to 400 representatives of the German press in Munich on November 10, he instructed them to shift the national mindset away from peace. It is absolutely necessary gradually to prepare the German people psychologically for the coming war. Hitler demanded, insisting that the press must make it clear that there are some things which only force, not peaceful means, must decide. This radicalization of racial policy is inextricably linked to Hitler's war plans and the massive financial demands of German rearmament. As predicted, the integration of the Sudan is for the moment straining the German economy due to the region's reliance on imported raw materials for its consumer industries. But it will strategically deliver massive reserves of coal and 70% of Czechoslovakia's iron and steel to the Ray. Meanwhile, total German state expenditures have reached between 30 and 33 billion Reichsmark for the year, while tax revenues are projected at below 18 billion Reichsmark. Because tax revenues will be insufficient to cover more than half of the state's actual spending, the RAI is now expected to have an uncovered budget deficit of nearly 9.5 billion Reichsmarks for the year. By November, the financial situation had become so severe that Walter Buffa, the finance ministry's representative to the Reichsbank, reported a catastrophic cash flow deficit of 2 billion Reichsmarks, warning that the Reich faced an immediate danger of being unable to pay its debts. Hence, the 1 billion Reichsmark atonement fine levied on the Jewish community, combined with the confiscation of insurance payouts from Kristallnacht, is only a terrible stopgap for an economy gushing out its fund like an exsanguinating pig at the slaughterhouse. As this reporter has repeatedly pointed out, the idea that expropriating less than 1% of the population would fill the Nazi coffers is an evil, childish fantasy. A fantasy that you can only believe if you are willfully ignorant that the antisemitic trope of gold hoarding Jews is nothing but a shameful lie. Nevertheless, the forced Aryanization of Jewish property has eliminated nearly all independent Jewish economic activity, transferring assets at deeply discounted price to Aryan buyers and cementing a profound material complicity between the German public and the Nazi state. The Nazi leadership seems to be caught up in economic wishful thinking, while the idea of windfalls from seizing supposed Jewish riches is collapsing like a house of cards around them, and their mood remains aggressive, vindictive, and eager to exploit the diplomatic capitulation of the West. While It is abundantly clear that the November 9 pogrom was no accident and was very much part of the Nazi anti-Semitic policy. Our sources inside the party leadership tell us of another more personal and emotional situation that contributed to the timing and vehemence of the violence. Apparently, the Nazi master of propaganda, Isef Gerbes, has gotten himself entangled in an amorous scandal that directly influenced the terrible events of November 9th. Gubba's predilection for dances with actresses, singers, and other artists who depend on his approval for their professional existence is a poorly kept secret in Berlin. By last August, one of these affairs with a young Czech actress, Leda Alberova, had pushed his marriage to Hitler's favorite Magda Gerbes to the brink of divorce. Hitler, who was not prepared to lose Magda as a public companion, demanded that Gerbes end the relationship immediately. We are told that Gbas was devastated, and while caught in a profound personal and political crisis that threatened his career, he still seriously contemplated separation from Magda well into October. Then on October 23, Hitler intervened personally, summoning the Gerbes couple to his mountain retreats in Berry's garden and forcing them to stay together. Joseph, now bitterly out of favor with the Führer, allegedly sought a way to regain his standing. The assassination in Paris provided the perfect opportunity. We are told that this contributed to Goebbels' timing to launch the November Terror when he did. Once, his speech at the Barrel in Munich ignited the spontaneous fury of the SS and the SR across the country. He both secured the Nazi leader's support and improved his situation, recording their fateful conversation that evening. Hitler decides, let the demonstrations continue, pull back the police. Let the Jews feel the anger of the people for once. That is right. Everybody dashes to the telephone right away. Now the people will take action. It should be evident that by the people are meant not a spontaneous national uprising but Nazi activists, paramilitary formations, party loyalists, and a minority of civilians willing to join or profit from the violence. Following the PUG, the leadership viewed the violence as a complete triumph, demonstrating both their absolute control over the paramilitary apparatus and the terrifying efficiency of their anti-Jewish measures. In contrast, public sentiment within the Reich was fractured. The initial dread of war during the Sudeten crisis formed into immense relief following the Munich agreement. But the brutality of Kristallnacht shocked many ordinary citizens. In Hamburg, the nationalist diary Louis soulmates with a husband and daughter labeled as Jewish witnessed the aftermath of the pogrom with horror. Most terrible thing is that the police and the fire brigade were not allowed to intervene. She also recorded how efficiently that anti-Semitic propaganda has taken root, with people on the street, noting how an elderly lady told her that if those people over there are shooting our folk,